Okay, welcome again. So I would like to share only a few words after seeing a fragment of small narration by Wojtek Ziemilski. And if I remember correctly, this is a performance that comes from 2009 and was a part of this very big movement or current in Polish theatre that could be grossly described as a memory turn after the year 2000. But I think that here something was dealt with in a very, very particular way. First, it would be to me the very dramaturgical and theatrical structure of this performance that is actually variation or play with the formula of a lecture or a performing lecture, and this situation in which actually the very private history and this biographical event and history of Wojtek Ziemilski's grandfather becomes not an event on its own, and even not only a private history interwoven with the bigger history of Poland, but also becomes mediated by a series of additional contexts. And in this way, maybe I would like to briefly refer to Susan Buckmore's that Bartek related to her work previously. But to me, what is like very, very important in her writing is this concept of universal history that is, in her vision, something that is like more of a flat structure that is syncretic and additive and like constantly a project in motion, that a fight, a struggle between these big narratives that can be constructed and labeled, and okay, now we tend this to be universal. And what she distinguishes as a feature of this universal history or universal narrative is a kind of a porous structure in which histories and events coming from different cultures are like closely sitting together and sipping from one to another in this kind of porous way. And I think that it's here what happens due to the media, because not only we've seen in this short sample documentary material showing Wojciech Dzieduszewski, the grandfather, but also these notes like written in child's hand. In the end of the performance, it is clear that these are notes from Wittgenstein's works on doubt. So we have this another layer, and this brief dance choreography fragment is that we saw in small narration is also a very important thing, because during entire performance, Wojtek Ziemilski refers to performances, choreographic dance pieces in which for the first sight have nothing in common with the subject of his performance, lecture, presentation. But then, as we proceed with the performance itself, we start to realize that actually he's trying to create this vast map of negotiation of one's identity, also embodied in this very much political way, coming from very different contexts. So, and of course also the context of technology itself, of pixelating memories, of depixelating them, of blurring the image, of transmitting one's experience through technological means. So to me, these were the things that made his small narration kind of special, because he never put the clear distinction between my small version of history and the official one. Maybe this also it's because of this crucial doubt that he's like he's not only doubting in this Wittgensteinian way, but also doubting himself, that he's not, as in this fragment we saw, he is not sure whether he should curse the historians of the National Memory Institute or his own grandfather for the same thing. So I would say that because of this doubt and because of this porous mediation, like all the big narrative structures that could be imposed on, they tend to collapse and intermingle. And also the thing that Wojtek is performing it himself, but putting himself in this very bizarre position because he's not an actor. He only then, when he created small narration, he became a performer, and also like playing with his status on stage is something also very meaningful to me. And of course we have some other material prepared to show you, but as Bartek did after Europe the Inquiry, now I would like to ask you, would you like to comment on what we saw, or do you have any questions about this, this material coming from small narration?
One, two.
Hi, I'm curious about your two like approach as a director in terms of transforming these kind of private stories from your actors to this kind of public sphere, and how do you transform you know, this kind of history, this kind of public issues into a theatrical way, into the actor's body, into different materials. Just like, I'm curious listening to your process.
Yeah, I think it's also one of the crucial questions that can be asked in this context. Let me just briefly refer again to Wojtek Ziemilski, because I think that like one of the most powerful things he's doing is the fact that actually he's the performer and the author and like the subject of his own story. So he doesn't impose it on anybody else than himself. But to me, it's also what you asked about is connected with this feature that we tried to describe as one of the distinctive features of new dramaturgies, that we need to change the model of work. So I feel obliged to negotiate, like, and more, the longer I work, I feel this need not to impose on the actors, but I would never, for example, use their private stories in a very, very direct way, because this is the kind of negotiation of the private that I'm not very fond of, unless you're the one who performs it yourself, but you also have like control over the entire body of the performance. So that's why I think that the initial process of rehearsals is more and more important, and if the institution allows it, now I try maybe not to come with a very finished script or very finished concept. I just try to say, okay, everybody knows that I'm the director, so I come with an idea, but now I try to encourage the actors to choose what is like most interesting approach. That's, for example, how we try to work with Wars I Never Lived Through, that me and like the team with which I work, that's like the dramaturg, choreographer, musician, we all presented, stage designer, lots of inspirations, documentary material, movies, artworks that inspired us, and we were trying like to negotiate with the actors, what is your position in the story, because we have some things in common, but some are different. That like means, for example, age. Because to me it was kind of maybe shocking that like my first very living memory of the war that I experienced through media coverage was the war in former Yugoslavia, and I was surprised that like for younger actors from my cast, it wasn't even there, because they were like and this shift that took over in some few years. I was telling them, you know, when I was like reading these coverages from Srebrenica or Sarajevo, and we're like, okay, but maybe to us it's not that much of an experience. So we're not negotiating the subject itself, but the approach. So I think it's one of the most important tasks for the institution at the moment to work on it, because And of course, it's also a matter of one's approach. As I said, I would never suck the private stories out in order just to make them part of the plot. Also, because I think that a little fiction makes the truth more true.
Okay, if I could add a little bit to what Veronika said, is that it is somehow becoming a kind of small tendency now in some line of Polish theater, let's say, because, for example, the performance you will see tomorrow, Africa, was created in somehow similar way, because actors were involved in the research process, so they were also finding some materials which were interesting for them, and to which they had some kind of personal and political at the same time attitude, and then they were bringing them, and some parts of the script were created around these materials and their personal attitudes toward them. It was, of course, it was a difficult task, because we were talking about Africa, about some problems, processes which are not quite obvious and not very much visible for Polish society and for actors as well. So the huge part of the process was getting to know as much as possible about that places and collecting this material. So, but this is also related to this political dimension. I would like to stress it very strongly now, that this taking private stories is more related to this theater of 90s, with this essential universalism, where this private history and private perspectives were crucial and were not interwoven with this social political dimension. So what is important personally for me is this political attitude which every actor has or can somehow create, then his private, intimate life, for example. So more, for example, when we talk about body, I'm more interested in the social choreography and certain constraints of the ways how we use our body than, for example, his private history of his body, let's say. So just brief.
Yeah, and maybe just one more thing, that it will be like less about the stories, but more about the experience and the position and the attitude. So we need to establish our own position toward the subject, toward the work, our position in the institution, which of course might be sometimes very risky, because it includes the consent to resistance, because I feel it's my duty to conduct this process of negotiations, but one day it might happen that the resistance is too strong. That, for example, the fact that I'm coming with a certain subject and I'm trying to negotiate the people and their positions will, for example, end up in some impossible situation. So, of course, this is how it happens in repertory theater when one works with the fixed ensemble. The other way is a kind of an out-of-institution work in which you can form your own collective, based on this shared things. But I think both models are equally interesting.
Okay. I'm feeling that you're changing a lot of things in the way to think and to work on theater. So I really would like to know how the audience, on one side, and institution as well, how they received this. How are they receiving this, especially the audience?
Mm-hmm. Okay. It's a very important question, but I would answer like this, because some of the performances we present today and which you can see, which you could see yesterday and you will see tomorrow, are inscribed in a very let's say particular current political and social situation. For example, you could see wars I haven't lived through yesterday, and now we have a big discussion about images. You know, these images of Ayan Kurdi and the images of dead children, Syrian children, and the images of refugees. And we find in Polish public debate that we don't have competences to read these images, to ask them questions, to have critical attitude towards that images. And we, say we, I mean, you know, we in the public debate somehow let very easily being manipulated by, you know, some interpretations of these images. So, for example, Veronica's performance, I think, plays in a very direct way with this current situation. So that's also a question about audience, because that's the audience which is composed of people from Polish society. So they are, you know, part of this debate. So I found that it plays with this context. For example, Africa was the next example. Africa, it was done 1 year ago. And there were some ironic commentaries from Polish critics. Oh, you are now, you know, working on Africa, but there are many local important issues. Why you don't deal with them? So of course, Africa was done purposely as a kind of opposition to this situation, you know, of not being curious about the world and about things which are happening somewhere. So this gesture was a political gesture as well. And now, after, you know, some few months, we can see that this tense between the global north and global south, and the problem of refugees, which is interrelated with the history of colonialism and neocolonialism, is becoming absolutely crucial theme. So it also makes some kind of creates some kind of relation with this subject and plays with it, but it's not. It was never conceived as, you know, answering to the audience needs, like that there are some needs which, you know, audience have for the performances, so we answer to them, and of course the reactions are very different. So we try to think about it, but, you know, politically to create some kind of tensions and not to answer the needs. I'm saying, you know, for myself. That's my point of view. And concerning institutions, it's more complicated, of course, because there are some certain legal, economical constraints in this field. What we try to do, I mean, now I'm saying as a deputy director of the theater, we try to democratize the organization level of the theater and also involve people from different departments to some kind of, you know, other activities and other works and other functions, and also to rethink this economical dimension of the institution, and also to think about the forms of labor and things like this. But it's like a really huge question about the institutional critique and, you know, and to what to do with this institutional level in performing arts. But yeah. But we try to shape it, not just, you know, fit or not fit to the institutional context, but also try to shape it and find tools to do it.
As coming to the audience, I would say that yes, it's one of the crucial tasks now to research, but I'm not sure if we have the tools, because actually that's what I've been struggling with for the past few years, that I have a feeling that now this transition provokes a very turbulent actually relationship with the audience. So it's as turbulent and the changes that we are observing or shaping, and I'm never so sure if what I know is based on some false assumptions or true assumptions, and there've been some actually attempts in the past few years to do some more, to put it more orderly research on the reactions and on the position that the theater takes now in the changing changing context. They still come. Many times they express the resistance or anger, but in a way I work, it's fine. So as the audience still is a part of an unknown to me, I try just to think of my duties towards them, which is to provide something to treat the audience seriously. Not to please them, I would say, but to treat people seriously. And if they react in a positive way or in a negative way, I like when people give themselves a choice, actually. And if they want to leave, for example, it's good. The worst is like sitting and not being too angry, for example, to react. But yeah, it sounds like I know something about it, but no, I think that it's like this turbulence is still a thing we need to think about. And in terms of institutions, this is a real task, I would say, because if we say that the changes also include the change in the working pattern, here we are with a real problem, because we are stuck with hierarchies. And for example, hierarchies can be observed most clearly on the example of actors of the ensembles. That's like, it's very, sometimes it's very hard to convince the managers of the institutions that maybe they should give some more freedom and independence to actors, and not to treat them like in this way of somebody who should like take every responsibility on stage. But it's like we could discuss it on practically every level. So if the relationship with the audience is turbulent, I would say that the utmost turbulence goes within institutions, because some of them are trying to reform maybe a bit from the inside. Some are just not interested, and some react to some, let's call, new dramaturgies in a way that it's some marginal thing that they can deal with on the outskirts of their actual work. So it's really opening a Pandora's box, this question, I would say.
Okay, so maybe we can go on now. Probably we won't have time to show you everything we prepared before, but now we would like to focus on a performance which we created together. We were writing a script together, and Weronika was also dramaturg of this performance. It was directed by me. It's In Desert and Wilderness after Sienkiewicz and others. And the script of this performance was based on the critical rewriting of the first novel, which is read by Polish students at primary school. It is a novel which is set in Egypt and Sudan at the end of 19th century during the Muhammad Ahmad uprising against Egypt. It's 1883, 1885. And in this book we have Polish teenager Staś Tarkowski and his close friend, 8-year-old English girl Nell, who are kidnapped by Muhammad's warriors in Egypt. There's a story about their fathers working in Egypt together. So there's a Polish family and English family. I don't want to now describe the whole structure of this novel, but it's important that they are kidnapped by Muhammad's warriors. But finally they managed to escape and then travel through the mainland of Africa in today's Kenya and Uganda, more or less. That's a short description of this novel. What is interesting, you have a small quotation from the script, which is taken from that book. It's what Staś Tarkowski says, and the thought flittered through my head whether it wouldn't be well to return here sometime, conquer a great tract of country, civilize the Negroes, found in that locality a new Poland, or even start at the head of a drilled black host for the old. Negroes are rather timid and gentle. Now I was to turn them invisible legions that none invisible legions that none could defeat. Legions that would dry-shot cross the sea and stand at the gates of Poland, and a warlike roar would issue from the black breasts, at the sound of which the bayonets of the nation's enemies would snap like twigs buffeted by the wind of change. That's a very exemplary fragment from this book, because you can see certain colonial and orientalistic phantasms inscribed in it here. First, there's a fantasy about Poland becoming a colonial empire. It's a very interesting moment in Polish history, because as relating to what Dariusz Kosiński said yesterday, there's the moment when Poland is not on a map. So it's the moment when this book is written, there's no Poland. We can say what is very problematic, but I will say it, that we are like some kind of post-colonial country which is dreaming about being a huge empire, and about the country which wants to connect to that colonial process. But the next part of it is also very interesting in terms of semiotic mass, because here is a fantasy about creating some kind of legion which will let Staś Tarkowski to come back to Poland and to fight for independency. And this observes in this fragment, it was the starting point for us to relate this this book to a very specific and very, I would say, not present in Polish public debate fact of Polish history, which was the Sea and Colonial League in 20s.
Yeah, but before we say a few words about the league, I would also add this fact that what we found interesting is the obvious fact that school children read this book without any critical comment on it. So fantasies about bringing legions from Africa to win Poland its independence back are not put in any critical context, and it's taking place in a moment when societies are reshaping them. So it's like this, for example, this fragment that Bartek quoted, becomes more and more peculiar, and this thing of not having this book problematized, we thought of a bit of outrageous fact, in a way. But and it's really this book has a very, very strong impact of this not only school kids but on imagination, I would say. Yeah, so and also the fact that we wanted to work on while doing this performance was this unobvious to us at the moment relation towards shaping the view of history, because we while rereading this book as adults, we noticed some facts that escaped our attention before. For example, how in this book that is supposed to, in a way, shape the imagination and values of a Polish child, are also inscribed some fantasies of having a totally different political and historical identity, which is the one of Western world. But what is most important, like when those two things meet and intertwine, is the moment when the character is supposed to take any position towards the other. So, to put it like in a very simple way, in a normal narrative, let's say, Poland is this suffering Christ of nations, not being on the map, and the timeless victim. When confronted with the African other, suddenly our Polish hero of this book becomes kind of a perfect European, because he is his civilization is this, because civilization is a very important word for this book, that's why I dare to use it. Suddenly, he is the same as British and as French. It's even in the very construction of this character, who is of Polish father, who fought in the national uprising, and of a French mother, deceased, of course, at childbirth, because no mothers allowed in this book. It's the same also with his little friend Nell, the British girl, who's also, like, her mother also died in labor. And actually the entire plot of the novel, which is like Polish boy rescuing this British girl during their adventurous trip through Africa, and continuously contrasted with the others, let's say, gives this grotesque impression of Poland taking care of Great Britain, and thus like being part of this Western world. That is what was shocking to us, being actually on the side of the colonizers. Like a fantasy developed in a country that was colonized itself, non-existent, and suddenly we have this fantasy of power. And then we also found something that we are not taught in school during history lessons, that is the history of a Polish Sea and Colonial League, which at its heyday had like what, million or 2 million members?
About 1 million members.
About 1 million members, and it was developed already in the independent in the interwar period. And it was an organization that was like growing in power. That's which main saying was, we need colonies for Poland. So we based our script not only on this book, but also on the peculiar events like this from Polish history that revealed those paradoxical colonial dreams. Because it again struck us as something weird that the country non-existent on a map regains independence, and one of the first things that start to develop is this dream of an empire. So do you have a microphone?
I've got, but a little bit later. What I would add to what Veronika said is that you can see how this two dimensions, this global and local dimension, how they are dialectically interwoven, and how they play in this book. What is important from this dramaturgical perspective is that we decided to arrange some kind of net research. We opened this blog and asked people to send us materials who were related to different forms of colonialism, to Polish history and Polish colonial fantasies, but also some materials which were created in Polish culture during the 20th century and the beginning of 21st century, which relate to Africa. You know, from pop culture through some journeys, everything. So we collected a quite huge material. Really, people responded to our answer, and then the script was composed of these different sources and different materials, and really that materials which were sent were used by us, and we tried to create some dramaturgical tensions between them. And what we would like to do now is to present you some, let's say, very short essay which was written by us as an introduction to something. Okay. as an introduction to the book, which was anthology of Polish plays and Polish texts for theater, in which this the script was published. We had to write that before to let's say to describe and to make more more obvious to foreign audiences our dramaturgical strategy. And in this fragment you will see, I think, very clearly how this method of work how it works and how it is created.
So we would like to present this introduction to this text and to this performance, because it gives not only some more information about it, but also it touches upon the very basic fact: what vision of Africa did we try to work on?
The Africa we are concerned with here doesn't exist. It is a phantom, a mirage, a patchwork of imaginings, ideas and fantasies. A meticulously constructed phantasm, a documentary falsehood, and a factual distortion. It is glossy tourist brochure, a vision for thrill-seeking explorers, a cheap holiday where the locals want to mug you. It is your own fear. Ryszard Kapuściński's The Shadow of the Sun, a special feature on CNN or BBC, an entry in the WordPress photo competition that draws your attention, and many other things that only exist in your memory.
The limits of the world are the limits of language. Whenever language cracks, it leaves fissures in the earth, which is why you will find many demarcation lines separating various familiar-seeming territories. The Africa we are concerned with here, and which does not exist, has absorbed many ready-mades. Lines spoken by Stanisław Tarkowski channel the surrealism of Michel Léry's ethnographical adventures, the experience of emptiness in Paul Bau's prose, and the rundown colonial narratives of Joseph Conrad.
Nell, a true discursive girl, sucks in and spews up so many words, which she processes in the machine that is her body, that listing them would take up more space than Western standards of proportion and style allow. Suffice it to say that Nell's self-consciousness is informed by Maya Deren and Raymond Russell. Kali, a not entirely genuine African, performs his identity in line with books of anthropology that he had found in the attic of his single-story Tukla.
They pissed him off so much that he decided to make them the basis for his private public theatre. Intimately familiar with Lévi-Strauss, his Tropique act is a true showstopper. He's also well versed in more radical post-colonial theory, which he doesn't hesitate to use in his political performances, even at risk of being accused of terrorism. The Arab kidnapper has, for his part, an extensive knowledge of classical Oriental poetry and knows exactly what Western tourists, captivated by the rustle of desert sands, expect.
We have given him some of our fury to atone for the fact that Sienkiewicz, in his ever so patriotic novel, failed to realize that the Arab, too, was fighting for his nation's freedom. The Polish scouts are basically generic scouts, even though their demands and dreams are taken from editorials in Morze, that's the magazine of Polish Colonial League, a pro-war magazine published by the Polish Maritime and Colonial League.
Seeing as the Africa we are concerned with here does not exist, we do not concern ourselves with the truth about the real Africa. We do not see people of color as being of any particular color, nor do we have them wear blackface. All these characters are intentionally contrived. Mia is chalk white, it is only the scouts who brand her with blackness. Kali is orange, not unlike an Inna Sadhu, though we never fall back on superficial multiculturalism. The last black man's skin is practically red, glistening like something out of Leni Riefenstahl's The Last of the Nuba, or a fantasy of ancient Sparta. Only the character of Africa wears black grease paint, but our Africa doesn't really exist, so it's okay. Besides, she's a critical performer, existing only through the performances she stages, incorporating the images and idioms of oppression, the better to criticize, subvert and distort them.
While our text does contain taboo words, it is not because in our savage Eastern European arrogance we reject political correctness, but because we are interested in the taboo and not only in terms of something exotic.
Speaking of savage, yes, here be savage beasts as well as animals that have long since been transformed into subhumans. Both types of creature have been experimentally embodied in human form. Saba the dog hums all sorts of tunes, but what he wants, what he really wants, are the songs of the British Empire. Though domesticated, the desert has brought out something wild within him. A reverse process occurs within King the Elephant, the king of the African jungle, with an episode on the island of Dr. Moreau behind him. We suspect that he has watched the black dancers performing in Antonioni's white La Notte.
In an Africa which doesn't exist, time is no longer linear. It skips forward and backward at random, sometimes pausing the times of the Mahdiya, sometimes sprawling out like the interwar period, sometimes dangerously resembling your own times. That is why we recommend you think about the simultaneity of words, situations and places. You don't need to stick to the sequence we have proposed either. Here, words can follow an exceptionally winding path.
The space can resemble an African live-action board game played out with the lazy cinematographic rhythm of Werner Herzog's Fata Morgana, to the sound of children's cries from Abbas Kiarostami's ABC Africa, among rusting European machinery, in a landscape that is difficult to identify as African because it does not agree with the memories of our our visual education has instilled in us, in the intense aroma of fair trade coffee and of the incense Christian exorcists used to cast our spirits. But it can also look any way you want it to.
Nor are these the only spirits, hauntings and instances of possession to be found here. Nell is haunted by dreamed-up Arabs from the Orientalist visions so thoroughly deconstructed by Edward W. Said, haunted by words, languages and names from various periods and geographies. Scully is haunted by anthropology, which he later uses for his own ends. For anthropology, as is her wont, gladly submits to any authority. All of our not entirely genuine Africans are haunted by the colonial figures and institutions, as in the Hauka movement. Nell, the whitest of all colonial girls, is ultimately possessed by Esli Dantor, a Haitian voodoo deity worshipped in many guises, including that of the Black Madonna from white Polish Częstochowa.
Bodies are haunted by signs and language, colors are haunted by colors, the senses are haunted by concepts, the truth is haunted by fiction, microbes are haunted by other microbes, ecosystems are possessed by plants, Europe is haunted by Africa, Africa is haunted by Europe, Poland, which in the 19th century didn't exist either, but was colonized by 3 foreign powers, is haunted by England. England is haunted by Poland, with her dreams of empire. The stage is haunted by ghosts. Documentary photographs of the atrocities perpetrated in Congo during the reign of King Leopold II are haunted by Felice Beato's war photography, the first ever visual reports from Sudan in the age of the Mahdi and General Gordon. And all this is haunted by theater, which is an artificially arranged sensuality in real time.
And nothing more.
This world, which does not exist, is full of noises, sounds and music, played live preferably, while the dynamic images you see are a kind of a visual ethnography, a study of images through images. Actors, objects, ghosts, music, animals and images create an artificial human and non-human ecosystem. Anything can become anything else. Anybody can become an invasive alien species.
All this had been written in the mode of documentary surrealism. We have added fiction to fact and documentarized fiction, so if you see anything that, for some reason, you would like to exorcise from your fantasy about our text, don't look away but worry, and bear in mind that fantasy, like collective memory, can only be cleansed by calling up its phantoms and letting yourself be possessed by the ghosts you are trying to suppress. And that's the end of the text. Here we can show some images, some covers of that C magazine from and some posters from the 30s, which were produced by that Sea and Colonial League, and which represent these fantasies about becoming a colonial empire.
I'll only add one thing to the longish text that we've already presented, that it was itself a part of a global negotiation itself, because like one of the reasons that we decided to write it for the publication in the American Anthology of Drama was our so-called Eastern European rudeness, because the American audiences were not sure whether we, coming from Poland, had actually a right to say anything about multicultural problems, because they considered it to belong to them and theirs only, which was kind of bizarre statement for us. And basically, we wanted to explain our strategy, which also was needed because of some usage of some very rude words or images that we obviously wanted to deconstruct and touch upon the taboo, but in the United States they were perceived in a totally different context.
So, yeah, some of the pictures, and this is the small colony Vanda, because that's not a full truth that we didn't have colonies, because we had some small plantations in Liberia and Cameroon and in Brazil, what should be stressed here. But of course, the whole process was being created on this phantasmatic level. Here are pictures from the performance. Just sorry, maybe too fast. Here you can see Polish scouts, the personification of Europe,
and the last black man.
The last black man, and Kali on the floor. Here you could see the personification of Europe and of Africa, totally constructed, artificially constructed, of course. Here you can see the elephant.
The British girl, the Polish boy, and the African elephant.
And here you can see a photo from Congo, and the person who was met by Staś Tarkowski in the Heart of Darkness in Africa, and lying personification of Europe. And this is the last scene of the performance. It's about, let's say, some kind of semiotic mess. The scene where everything mixes with everything. So some Polish European signs are mixed with African signs. Phantasms are mixed with archives, and it is a kind of a scene in which you can see fully how this global and local perspective intermingle and become somehow one big mess, let's say. Okay, limit full. Okay, maybe we can show you now a fragment, the fragment of a scene which is called the desert.
But because we do not have there's never been a version with English subtitles, we will have to provide you with a very bizarre version of voiceovers. We will be dubbing the fragment.
Tak, tylko muszę wiesz co znaleźć to oczywiście.
Próbowano zatrzymać przy użyciu Zresztą też. Inni chłopcy mieli nade mną
Żebyśmy mogli czytać. One second, I need to find it. The hour was 5 in the afternoon. The weather was splendid. The summer had already passed on that side of the Nile and declined over the desert, sinking to golden and purple twilight glowing on the western side of the sky. The world lost the trace of reality and appeared to be one play of supernal lights. An illumination like that must cost a lot of money.
Exciting, amazing, very, very well.
The desert makes a reliable setting for all kinds of stories.
Exciting, amazing, very, very well.
These are probably the first tourists to come here since the last African war. I really should look at that photos.
In the meantime, the camels swept like a hurricane over the sands glistening in the moonlight. A deep night fell. The distant desert hills were enveloped with silvery vapors like muslin.
How exotic, how lovely is this nest woven on a camel's hump.
Quail's egg could not crack in those housings.
If one is to exaggerate, then exaggerate after the Arabian fashion. I ought to look at the photos that are to be developed. Yalla, yalla, Mr. Yalla, Proverbs. Okay, so maybe they changed the version during the Proverbs. A hidden well makes the desert beautiful. The desert makes a man face himself, it flushes the mind and squeezes out the essence.
Speaking of essence, Nell, would you like some tea? Tea in the Sahara? Oh, this little girl is so beautiful.
Tea in the Sahara, truly Victorian adventure.
I ought to look at the photos that are to be developed so I can realize I'm in something resembling Africa.
An all-inclusive desert holiday.
In the darkness above the Sahara, the stars shine with such unreal intensity
that they almost seem to be a stage decoration. Sing, O desert sand, sing. When Mainun did learn of Layla's doom, he rent his clothes and rushed to her tomb. A child he met there, bold and brave, it laughed when asked, but Layla's grave and said, Majnunie, if you loved true, you would know precisely what to do. Now go and search the desert lands, scoop and smell the shifting sands, and if you smell the scent of love, her grave will be there. Sure enough. If you have to lie, do it as only in the East they know how to lie. Two bright little gloves in the sand. Yours, little viper? Are you making a road?
He struck her with a kubash, a terrible Arabian whip which cuts even the hide of a camel. Nell, though she was wrapped in a thick plaid, shrieked from pain and fright.
Your head is like an empty guard. If you have kidnapped us for money, then know that the father of this little being is richer than all the Sudanese put together. You know that the white people of Europe always keep their words.
But can all their money open for us the gates of paradise, which only the blessing of the Mahdi can do? Howsoever much the people in the East are greedy and venal, nevertheless, when the true Mohammedan views any matter from the standpoint of faith, there are not any treasures in the world with which he can be tempted.
Sand and sky. Sand and sky. The desert is contained in these two words. But they don't contain its soul, it's hard to define. After some time one senses perfectly well that there is a third thing between the suns and the sky. Something that represents the essence.
Satan, there is no tea here.
A stupefying deadness, a horror I could barely have conceived. Furrowed sun, the sky above it glazes over like a dead man's eyes behind which no soul stirs.
It's not exotic, it's empty. Words become as sand, hearts become as sand.
Hence the oppressiveness, hence the anxiety, hence the fear. Here man is only sheltered by the sky. Reach out, pierce the fine fabric. There is nothing beyond it, not even stars. Beneath the shelter of the empty sky I could even kill.
The sand is coming out of my eyes and my ears. Has the oppressiveness, has the anxiety, has the fear. Here man is only sheltered by the sky. Reach out, pierce the fine fabric. There is nothing beyond it, not even the stars. Beneath the shelter of the empty sky I could even kill.
The Arabs are asleep, Nell is asleep, but I am not asleep.
And I have to save her. To kill man. No, he was incapable of this. What if sleeping with the weapon and hiding among the rocks he should kill not the men but shoot the camels?
Okay, so that's the first fragment.
Maybe we shouldn't, as it's
What
like
time?
we're running out of time.
Okay, we still have 25 minutes.
No, we don't.
We have, because we finished at 2:15.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, we agree that that they will have 15 minutes more because we started late, and we will give you some, like this 15 minutes more for the lunch. So.
Okay.
Well, but it depends on you. If you if you can finish a little bit earlier, we can do it as well.
Okay, so Veronika said that we should start talking now. Okay, so you could see in this scene, you know, I think that all that Orientalistic stereotypes and phantoms being put in motion, and you know, everything which we said before made visible. I don't know, maybe we should just open the discussion now and ask you what are your impressions after, you know, our this short essay and this fragment and this way of working. And Ania is coming.
You said that the kids are reading this book in the school now?
Yes.
Yes, still.
No more?
No
but
more?
when we were doing the performance...
Yes, but it was a few years ago, and then they
It-
changed the
2011.
Okay, so
Yeah,
2011.
It was read. It has been read for many years. I read it as a schoolboy in my school times. Yeah, you as well. But recently they changed the list of the books you are obliged to read in school, and I suppose they also removed this one, but not because they realized that it's politically incorrect. They removed it because they removed almost everything.
Yeah, because I think that it's right that they removed it being too old-fashioned, like not because but it must have changed in the recent past few years, because when we were working it was still on the curriculum.
Okay. So I'm also interested in knowing a little bit more about the last question about audience. I wonder, I think it's important, who is seeing this new theater that you're creating? Is it, because sometimes what happens, I don't know, I know sometimes, well, Buenos Aires has a phenomenon of independent theater, pretty outstanding, that everyone goes to the theater, but in New York City, it seems like everyone is paying $10 to see each other's shows. And I wonder what is the case here. Is it that this new theater is seen by the same community, or is the oldest generation that is not a generation of theater, but the regular audience coming to see this work? I wonder who comes to see this work.
I need to give one more additional information regarding the audience, because because of some scenes of nudity that appeared in the performance, we were asked by the theater to make it for the audience 60 plus, 16 plus.
Yes.
So like people from not the children from of course under this age could come, but also regarding audience, maybe we should say a few words about the theater in which it was actually produced, because it was produced in a theater in the city of Wałbrzych, which used to be a kind of a theatrical phenomenon during past few years, because this Wałbrzych is a city in the so-called regained territories, which means that before the war this was Germany, now it's Lower Silesia in Poland. And this is a town that underwent the transformation of 1989 in a very, very turbulent way, which means that it's, the rates of unemployment are skyrocketing, and this was a mining city, so the mines were closed, and for many years it was an example of a very, very, very dilapidated place. And this peculiar thing with theater happened, because Wałbrzych has one puppet theater and one dramatic theater. We were in a dramatic theater that suddenly it became one of the most progressive theaters on the map of Poland. So it played not only for the local audience, but also toured a lot. And some people and audience also sometimes consisted of people who would come from other cities, because this theater was considered to be a phenomenon, let's say. And like trip from Warsaw to Wałbrzych takes around 9 or 8 hours. So
by train.
So it's long trip. For example, from the capital. So, like actually, we had three types of audiences. First would be this local, regular one, because like people were really accustomed to going to theater, which at its like best days was some kind of a local pride that like nothing works in Wałbrzych apart from theater. Second was this audience gathered during festivals, and of course this is a festival audience as we all know. And third would be this very specific audience when so many people would come from other cities that they would actually prevail over the local audience. I think that with this performance we had one case like this with people from Poznań, students, anthropology students, performative studies students coming especially to see this performance. So yeah, three types of as it so three groups of people actually to negotiate different things.
Mm-hmm. But of course we tried to play a little bit with this formula of theater for students. So the theater which is that schools are invited to see this because it was in the canon of Polish literature. So there were some cases when classes were coming to see it, and of course teachers were absolutely furious after seeing it.
And coming back to this question of audience, like we had one severe confrontation with the audience when we were playing this performance in the new what's this called, this festival in Zabrze, for new festival for new place in Zabrze. And we had a meeting with the audience, and like many people in the audience were really furious with us for taking their childhood book and making it dirty somehow. And so this was like first thing, why would you do this? Because like this book is really like adventurous, that the language is very colorful, very, it plays with the imagination. So
it's a kind of adventures book,
yeah,
as well.
So really, if you are blind to some kind of things, it can be really pleasant to read it. So people were really angry. Why would you put our childhood book in dirt? And the second would be that actually the problems we're dealing with are not problematic, because the book was written in 19th century, and in this moment, people in Poland thought so of other cultures, other people, and that we are, So there was a really big confrontation, and even actors were asked, how do you feel being a part of a project that makes our childhood dreams dirty? So, But it was really, it wasn't pleasant, but it was very interesting, this confrontation, really.
Yeah, I would like to ask you if there has been a study, a more general study about the audience of theaters in Poland, and particularly the ones who would show less conservative work and more innovative work.
There were some researches about Warsaw theaters audiences, and now in the last what is this Mozak magazine? The title. There was a research done by Polish very young sociologists Maciej Gdula and Mikołaj Lewicki about audiences and classes. So some class patterns of consumption culture, but it wasn't restricted to theater, but it was open to a broader context. But I wouldn't say that there were very systematic. Maybe Darek would. I don't.
They weren't.
Yeah, actually, we are in the process or taking this data, because our institute is somehow also involved in it. So I will partly answer this question as well. And actually, this process of all some experts' opinions and also interviews and surveys that were done during last few years, actually. Right now we are collecting some data which we can really have some results. Actually, last Monday I went for one meeting in Gdańsk. We were also talking about that, and there are some new from the Warsaw University. There is also a group that they are trying to develop, like what kind of audience is taking part in culture in general. So the theater is like one of the issues in their research, but they are looking more globally on theater and on opera as well, which is actually there was one interesting thing during this meeting that the guy that is responsible for the research was telling, that actually there is some change in mind of the Polish audience, that it's that they can see that they right now they are not embarrassed to say during such a survey that they don't go to the theater, because theater and opera, as opera is, seems to be like the most elitar culture, part of culture. They still say that sometimes they go to culture and to the opera and philharmonic, even if the other data shows that they don't, that such a percentage don't go to these places. But with the theater, it's somehow it's changing. So he said that you can see the difference in the audience, that they try to go to the theater, but they also try to think that theater is already not so elitar place for the audience. But actually, the most of the experts are right now working on this development and the ideas how the Polish audience looks like. So I think that we should have, like, really in next few years more data about that.
Did you have like a talkbacks after the show with the audience to have a discussion just like this? And how do you know about their reaction? They are furious. And is it common in Poland, like, you know, the discussion with the audience after the show?
Yeah, with this, like, it's pretty common at the festivals. At the festivals, there's like also every time you have that's why we know that during this particular festival people were furious, because they told us. And yes, there are some like talks with the audience. They are not after every performance, but it's I think that it's mostly like that there is a meeting with the audience after the premiere, after the opening, and there's usually something called the students premiere for or opening for younger people. So there's also an additional meeting with the younger audiences. And sometimes performances are part of a broader network of educational programs, and then the meetings are more often. So I would say that always there is at least one or two meetings with the audience, not after every performance, but we are able to get some first-hand feedback, not only depend on our feelings and observations of.
Yeah, but of course it's something I would say. No, because you go out with that audience, so you hear what they say. So it's not always very systematic discussion or very direct commentaries. But you see, for example, for me it was very interesting to observe how certain groups behave after the performance, how they comment. So what I observed was that most of the teachers who came to the performance with their students had problems, because now they need to spend some time talking about this issue. So I think that was the problem. I'm not quite sure if they were prepared for intellectually to make this kind of discussions. But of course, it's not with every group of students. For example, there was a group from Poznań who came from Poznań, from the secondary school. From the secondary school and from university, from theatrology, performance studies from Poznań University, and it was a really brilliant discussion with these two groups. So, and they could understand a lot of things and asked many questions and wanted to get to more about this subject. So of course it depends, but
yeah, but also these meetings, they I would say take many forms. Because for example, if we had this audience coming from other city, from university and from high school, they expected something like a seminar, so they could ask questions and dwell on some topics. Sometimes it's just like the discussion is loosely shaped and the audience can share, comment, ask questions, express fury, doubts. Sometimes when it's a part of, for example, educational program, of course it's like different. So I would say there are also many kinds of sometimes it's like getting feedback, sometimes it's more of the seminar work, it just depends.
Okay, so maybe there's two more and we will finish, okay?
Thank you. I would like to ask still about this audience reception, because what happens in Czech Republic and political theater or politically involved theater is that it's somehow in a bubble, that people who already are interested in the topics are attending these performances. So you spoke about as direct reactions after the performances, discussions with the students, but I would like to ask if the topic is actually becoming a part of the public debate, or if it stays only in the frame of discussion after the performance. That's the first question. And also what happens in Czech Republic, that even in the case of political theater, then the critiques seems to be afraid to discuss the content or discuss the political aspects of the performances, which in my opinion are the most important, and they still focus on the aesthetics or on the creators. So I would like to know your opinion about the public debate and the content. Thank you.
That's a very important question, so thank you very much for it. Of course, our aim is to introduce some thoughts and ideas to public debate, and it really depends, because for example, in Desert Wilderness, it became a little bit a part of public debate, but still, I think that there was a short text in Gazeta Wyborcza by Joanna Takarska-Bakir, which wasn't about this performance, but was very, her thoughts and her reading of that book was very close to our attitude toward that book. And I would answer that sometimes it happens, sometimes not. And you can't really, create conditions which would be efficient and which can guarantee you that these thoughts and these performances will become a part of public debate. When considering critics, it's still, the problem of most of the critics is that they, I would say, they don't have tools to analyze and interpret in this political dimension of performances. So of course, most of them are focused on this aesthetic level. What makes our work less important, let's say, because when we speak about, was it performed better or worse, was it beautiful or not beautiful, or was it done better or not, and we don't concentrate then on thoughts and on ideas and on this interplay with the context, but on this aesthetic level, I would say. But there are some critics who have this ability and tools to do it, but I think that's minority.
Yeah. However, things have changed a lot, because of course it's as Bartek said, that some critics or people writing about theater are reluctant to find this dimension. but some are doing this, and it's not a dirty word anymore, because like this attitude that artists should stick to a non-defined art is luckily over. So I think that we shouldn't complain that much. And there are some very strong examples when actually some ideas or thoughts or concepts embedded in performances are in the middle of public debate. This I would, for example, refer to this case of w imię Jakuba S. In the name of Jakub S. by Monika Strzemka and Paweł Dymirski, which dwelt on peasant roots of a Polish society in which 90% of the people would pretend to be descendants of aristocracy, but they're not. So to this repressed peasant tradition and the tradition of peasant rebellion as linked to the modern capitalism, and it became like stated in the very center of a public debate, because many philosophical, anthropological books on this subject would be published. So like theater integrated itself into this field. I know that both of us are sometimes unhappy with the lack of the more subtle tools, because the political dimension is like observed and is a matter of a public debate usually when it's like stated in a really strong manner. And sometimes when you try to play with it more, like this political dimension can be simply overlooked.
And one more important thing is this institutional dimension. That, for example, what we try to do in Bydgoszcz, in this expanded field of art, is to not only to wait for this public debate, but also to try to influence this public debate. So we organize debates in collaboration with Le Monde Diplomatique, for example, around the themes of performances, and try to inspire this public debate actively, and not only wait if something happens or not. Yeah. And.
Okay, and the last question.
When we reinterpret or reconstruct the text, normally, the theoretical framework is understandable. But in performance aesthetics, particularly in experience, different with the political dimension or political agenda. Sometime in our Indian experience, theoretical framework is understandable, similar, both. But when we do the reconstruct the text, some people use that projector, that video material, then it's become a fashion. That experience not personal one. That is little confusion, namesake, that is created that leads to namesake experiment. You understand?
I'm not good.
That because your theoretical things is understandable, what you explain. When you reconstruct with one particular text, that experience is creating sometime it's create a namesake experiment in one level.
But I'm not quite sure if I could understand it correctly. But you mean, so there is this theoretical dimension and some ideas, I don't know, we presented or we have, and then there's the level of, I don't know, realization of these ideas, yes?
No, in our experience also, that theoretical understanding is very clear. When we go for the reconstruction, reinterpreting the text, the experiences differ. But when again you go with the same methodology, even though your theoretical framework is different, but your construction method is same, similar one.
I'm not quite sure if I can catch the point. You mean that you start with some kind of concept, and then when creating a performance and reading the text and interpreting it is somehow the starting point is change and influence, but that work.
I saw
so you mean that, okay, so we say something about the theory, then you see, for example, a fragment from In Desert and Wilderness, and you are not quite sure how it relates to that theory, for example.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So you are confused because you don't see the connection between, for example, what we said before about this post-colonial perspective of reading Polish literature and what you could perceive on the screen. That's
new dramaturgy, your position, what you told, everything is the theoretical thing is very understandable. But when you show the example, that experience, that is again it's through the reconstruction process. That similar image and similar things will come. How we can go beyond that? That is my question.
I think he says the language doesn't, the theatrical
Maybe we can discuss
doesn't adapt to, I'm not sure, that the theatrical language doesn't adapt to the new matters you're bringing together for this specific experience, and that the new language should be invented. Is that correct? Yes.
Yeah, of course. I know that's what we generally wanted to do, to invent some kind of a new dramaturgical language and new and new ways of performing this material in the theater. I don't know if the result is is good or not, but that was the aim to create this dramaturgical structure out of the ideas we had, and of course that these ideas were changing during the process of working on rehearsing, finding new elements, new sources, but.
Well, of course, we can. It can be a subject to discussion, but how is the very language of theater itself changed? But I think what we were trying to show on this example is that, like, in each case, something was like pushed further. For example, first Europe inquiry, actually dance dealing with the undancey problems and undancey dance in a way. Then how the memory discourse somehow blows up the very form of performance, that it had to be turned into some kind of a performing lecture, and our struggle with this childhood book that is actually turned into a performance for adults. So it's, in each case, to me, it's a slight change of theatrical language, but of course it might also seem like this only from our position. So that's why we initiate this discussion, because we know that, like, this viewpoint we discussed before is what we call new dramaturgies do not have to be new to everybody.
Of course, the last piece, it was the most theatrical somehow, in ways of acting, things like this. But at the same time, it was. Because maybe you should see the longer fragment from it, but it was composed of different styles of acting. So there were some very formal fragments. Then it was commented from outside. Then you had some kind of working with physical activities. Physical actions, and then these physical actions were cut, and then there was a commentary from outside, for example. So it was like acting, for example, some kind of identities, and then commenting or counterpointing them from different perspectives. So I would say that the theatrical language of this performance was quite heterogeneous as the material, like the material from which it was composed. But at the same time, okay, it is the most theatrical from this three presentations, of course.
It's true that this fragment that we showed could be a bit misleading, because in this moment, when we particularly devoted our attention to the performing of stereotypes, like, it would be like the most theater, which was a bit of cheating on our part, because in other sections of this performance, it would, as Bartek said, the form would change. But still, this is always the question, how actually theory and these new concepts are to deal with the very language and form.
Okay, I have to cut it here. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you very much for conversation.
Thank you very much. I think we will have some occasion, you will have some occasion to meet them during next day. So if you will have more questions, just, you can talk personally. Short advertisement. The lunch is waiting. I have the lists again.